The first time Harold Crane heard the phone ring, he didn't think much of it. It was 2:11 a.m., the kind of hour when every sound feels heavier, amplified by the darkness. The house was a cavern of shadows, the street outside silent, blanketed under a thick layer of February snow. He lifted the heavy plastic receiver from its cradle, expecting the familiar hiss of static, a dead line. Instead, he heard his own voice say, "Hello?" It wasn't an echo. It wasn't a recording. It was just him, somehow on the other end of the line. A beat of stunned silence, and then the call disconnected. By morning, the phone line was completely dead. But that wasn't what truly frightened him. What frightened him was the small, folded note he found on his doorstep later that day. It read simply, "Thanks for picking up." Harold lived alone on Pinecrest Avenue, a narrow, forgotten street on the edge of a dying town in Washington state. He was 64, and a quiet man who filled his days fixing old radios and reading repair manuals he no longer needed. The phone in his kitchen was a rotary relic olive green. It was a kind that hummed with a faint, ghostly energy even when no one was speaking. It hadn't rung in years, not for any real reason. The first few nights after that bizarre call, Harold tried to ignore the suffocating silence, told himself it was a fluke, a glitch in the aging system. But every night, precisely at 2:11 a.m., the phone would click, just once. It was a sharp, distinct sound, like a breath being drawn in, and then nothing. The silence would return, somehow deeper than before. His neighbors, when he cautiously asked, shrugged it off. They said the old telephone exchange sometimes looped calls, replaying voices from old test lines. It was a comforting thought, a rational explanation. Harold wanted to believe that. He needed to believe it. Until the night he broke his own rule and answered the click again. This time, the voice on the line didn't say hello, whispered urgent and strained. "Don't hang up." He froze, his hand trembling on the receiver. The voice was unmistakably his, own tired, cautious but older, worn down by something he couldn't comprehend. And then it said something even stranger, something that chilled him to the bone. "You'll forget this tomorrow." The next morning, Harold woke with a splitting headache and a confusing sense of emptiness. He had no memory of the late-night call, no recollection of that whispered warning. It was just another day, until he walked into his kitchen and saw the note on his table. It was in his own handwriting, a single, shaky line. "You answered again." A cold dread washed over him. He started keeping a log, a small notebook dedicated to the nightly occurrences. Each entry started the same, ring 2, 11 silence, my voice. At first, the voice on the other end was just a presence, a mirror of his own. But then, it started asking questions. Simple, personal things. "Are you happy? Do you still fix the radios? What happened to Mom's clock?" Every answer Harold gave, the voice would repeat it, but softer, more distant. As if it were learning how to speak all over again, piecing together a life from scattered fragments. He tried to capture it, to get proof. He set up a tape recorder, but every single tape warped. The reels would twist themselves into impossible knots just before the 1-minute mark, the magnetic tape mangled beyond repair. In a fit of desperation, he disconnected the phone entirely, pulling the cord from the wall jack. He stood there, watching it, waiting. And at 2:11 a.m., it rang anyway. Sound wasn't coming from the phone itself. It was a disembodied dial tone humming through the very bones of the house. He followed it down to the cold, damp basement, to the old fuse box on the wall. And there he saw it. A single wire, one he had personally cut years ago, was pulsing with a soft, otherworldly light. That night, clutching the dead receiver, he finally asked the question that had been haunting him. "Who is this?" There was a long pause on the other end. Then his voice replied, "You, just later." And then, so faintly, he almost missed it. It added, "Don't let it happen again." Harold became a man possessed. His quiet, ordered life dissolved into a frantic obsession. He spent his days at the town library, tracing every circuit diagram, every telephone record he could find. That's when he discovered it. His address, 134 Pinecrest Avenue, was listed twice in the phone company's official archives. One entry was under his name, Harold Crane. The other was listed as Harold Crane, deceased 2026, but it was still only 1999. his hands shaking. He called the company. They were dismissive, blaming it on a simple clerical error, a typo. But when he went back and checked the record again the next day, the date of death had changed. Now it said 2025. The calls continued, growing more and more unsettling. Sometimes, when he picked up, the line was just empty, filled with a heavy, expectant silence. Sometimes, he could hear the faint, ragged sound of his own breathing on the other end, a disquieting echo. Once, he heard a third voice, distant and distorted, whispering something that sounded like, "He answered too soon." Sleep became a stranger. His logbook devolved into a chaotic mess of scrawled lines and frantic phrases. "The echo is shortening," one entry read. Another said, "He's catching up." Then one night, the impossible happened. The call came 1 minute early. To 10 a.m., paralyzed by fear, Harold refused to pick it up. He just stood there, listening to the relentless ringing. But it didn't matter. The phone answered itself. The next morning, a neighbor noticed Harold's front door was ajar, swinging gently in the cold morning breeze. Peeking inside, she saw the olive-green telephone, the receiver dangling from its coiled cord, swinging like a pendulum. The phone was still humming with that faint electric life, but there was no signal on the line. Police reports would later note a single outgoing call made from the house at exactly 2:11 a.m., dialed to its own number. And on the kitchen table, the logbook lay open to its final page. There was just one last entry, written in a hand that was steady, almost resigned. He finally picked up, they say that sometimes. Late at night, if you listen closely to the old lines in that dying town, the exchange still clicks once. Exactly at 2:11 a.m., there's no ring, no dial tone. No, just the sound of a breath being taken. And somewhere in the static between then and now, two versions of the same voice are still trying to remember who called first. Thank you so much for joining me in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the edge of reality. Stay safe and always be careful who you answer the phone to.